Greetings, brothers and sisters. Okay, so this is an audio that's going to go on all three of my channels, everyone but the Apocalypse Now channel. The channel for Gratefulness Meditation, my backup channel where I cover the Doooji Debacle, and then the Journey series, 153. This is just a continuation of the last two voiceovers I did about this subject. And so there was a wonderful individual sitting this morning, the absolute technique. And, I really did get a boost from the Chargy Gathering. Wonderful satsang on Sunday, and then a really great Tuesday morning sitting. And my meditations have been really good, spontaneous transmission. So my practice got rejuvenated like it's supposed to. And, so I wanted to add that to the first, there's been 3 audios about this that will be in the Journey series. So, I was so busy during the Chargy Gathering, I wanted to give it more time. And I really felt like zero enthusiasm or energy to cover the Doooji Debacle, which was, it was resolved during that period, because of the false claim he made about a Babaji message that said to combine all that stuff. But, I was struggling a little bit with, moving forward with gratefulness, and still am. There's no, path forward. It's just going to be what it is for now. And then if something happens, something happens. But anyways, my meditations have gotten really good. There's been a boost, and that, is important. So what I want to talk about today, though, is, and that's, part of it. What I want to talk about is the conversation I had with this guy that was, an older Abhyasi, somebody who was an Abhyasi for years. And it's the only person I'm really in contact with. And his revelation, they talked to a preceptor. A lot of the people are still meditating on Chargy's form. Clearly not connected to Kamlesh, which, there could be no other way, because Kamlesh really sucks. And, I was thinking that this is a test that really none of us were going to pass. I think I'm doing a pretty good job for what my assignment, whatever it is, what I can do. But it's a test that, in reality, Chargy was carrying so much of the load of the mission and keeping it, going forward despite everybody's not rising up to the challenge. This test of Doooji's debacle, which was not hinted at, not prepared for. The Whispers message about Kamlesh were positive, and, as far as the last ones that were there from Madame Alin, which are not to be trusted because Kamlesh, of course, could have doctored them or, whatever. But I don't know. I have no idea the integrity that was in the system that, in terms of the people taking down the messages and these things. But she showed up, and she appeared in 2016 at a gathering via video at the Babaji gathering. And so she seemed to be having a good relationship with Kamlesh and whatever, the medium. And so, whatever that is. But there was no indication that this was ever a possibility. In fact, the fundamental principle of the system was that there would be a living master for some period of time, and that the system would be around for like 10,000 years, right? And there was no, any kind of idea that any of us had that the mission would survive without a living master. In fact, me and this guy who was a preceptor who it wasn't a preceptor at the time, but was an Abhyasi, he's since become a preceptor. He's a guy who is a scientist for MIT. And we were about the same age, and we had a number of conversations for, both of us were just sort of, this was our big thing, Saj Marg, and we didn't, he was going through a divorce kind of thing, that he got married at a gathering. It's a whole thing. But we had a conversation in which we talked about what would happen if Chargy died and there's no living master. There was no person to fill his position. We both agreed that the mission would just fall apart. because there was so much conflict and so much, just people being sucky and people being people. And we had it like in centers, like my preceptor Fred said to me, that he had been a preceptor. He was the only preceptor in the center. Center is the area. Like if you're in Atlanta, there you have a center there, right, where your home is, and you radiate out this energy, and it creates a spiritual area there. And there's a position you have. It's like you have this cosmic position to do this spiritual work in a small local area. And many times there'd be multiple preceptors. And he said, being a preceptor um, by himself was so much better than being a preceptor with other people. And I know that he had conflict. So there were 6 preceptors where I was, and I could see that there was tension between him and Mr. and Mrs. B, and they, did things differently, right? And I became part of that conflict because, they had different ideas of, what I should do or what I should be guided to do that my preceptor Fred was doing and whatever. And that, was unfortunate because they had no, like became obstacles to my spiritual journey. I mean, they became like haters, I would say, more than obstacles because of that, whatever was going on between them. And so, there was this pettiness in Fred and Mr. W, who was his clown, who was the center in charge, and this other guy used to, argue all the time. And I just, knew about all these problems preceptors were doing, Babaji preceptors who just really never bought into the books and didn't particularly buy into Chargy, and they were just, there's a whole thing. And that was just in America. And then there was all this stuff that's, went on with Chargy's inner circle that I didn't even know about. I thought those guys were doing good, and they weren't. And then, of course, later on, I would find out about their insistence on making Sajmark an NGO and then getting involved with the UN, which has been a debacle and a failure because of their, wanting to be big men and, being so mainstream and, money people and not, in any way truthers. No sense of, any anti-establishment kind of, and other narratives, being able to accept other narratives, and Kamish being like that too. All of them like wanting celebrity status and, all the things that we've seen that gone on with Kamish. And so, long story short, the mission was a mess without Chargy. Like he was the pillar of the whole mission, holding it together. People's love for him, his respect for him, and his competence and his ability to just do the work and carry the mission. But, it's obvious now that there was no replacement for him. There was no somebody who could fill his shoes, and, the thing has fallen. And without any really warning other than everything I just told you that most of us kind of knew, but we had just assumed there would be someone to take Chargy's place that would come in and continue doing what he was doing. And so most of us, like, were not good. Like, we loved the system, and we, loved and respected Chargy and, all of those things. But, we were struggling because, part of it was always a struggle was you would be taken to such a high level of spiritual, whatever it was, experience and a different level of consciousness when you went to a gathering with Chargy or you went to India and you had these incredible meditations and just you were in these ashrams that were like heaven, heaven on earth. They were caught between, and you would leave your material life behind for some period of time, and you would just dive into your internal condition. And I don't know how many people did that. Maybe there's 10,000 people who were able to sort of reach that level. And sometimes in your own practice, in your own centers and satsang and these things, you would reach these spiritual conditions. Sometimes even reading the books, it would, connect you, and you would have these wonderful meditations. And then you go out to this crappy world that we live in that's so not spiritual. And you really weren't, you didn't really deserve the kind of level of spiritual experience and condition you were able to receive from Sajmark. That was always the issue, because it wasn't like we were all saints, and we might have had past lives where we did great things, and we had good past lives, but we also had not so good past lives. And it wasn't like we were all just, these spiritual giants who deserved, millions of years of spiritual evolution all at once. I mean, that's what you get when you go to the Central Region. And you would experience the Central Region and the goal at these gatherings. And then you would go back to the world, and it was hard. Like, the world was like, there was just, you'd want to stay connected to that energy and that consciousness. But the world would just, suck you back down into the abyss and the, depravity of this thing. And the heaviness of it. And there is such a contrast between the way the world is and what you experience at a gathering. And I really can't, put it into words, and people struggled with that, right? They wanted to feel that way and continue that, but they would get pulled down into their material lives, and, they wanted to, whatever it was. And so, and it was hard to go back and forth, like, it was just a transition. Like, you just wanted to stare at the wall and, think about God and feel the energy and just be in these states. And you had, a job to attend to, and, family life. And sometimes with the jerking, the jerking of being pulled out of that spiritual world back into the material world, when you get emotional, you get, hostile even, whatever. There was this, it was hard to navigate this transition between what you were experiencing at the gatherings and with the master of the system and what the real world was like. There's such a heaviness, material heaviness. Of course, it's much worse now. And the world is like falling apart, and in a apocalyptic free fall. And so there never had been really a smooth transition between the masters of the system. That's the other piece to this. So Lalaji died, and he had no disciples, and a bunch of he had like 200 disciples, but he had no successor. And there was no organization. People just came to Lalaji's house. There was no official mission. There was nothing called Saj Marg or Sri Ramchandra Mission. And Babaji was this quiet little meek person that saw Lalaji like 7 times in his life. Lalaji lived in Fatehgarh, and Babaji lived in Shah Jahanpur. It was like, I think it's maybe an hour drive. Let me just check that out. So I looked it up. Shah Jahanpur is 77 kilometers from Fatehgarh. But they say it's like takes 2 hours and a half to get there. It's 48 miles. And so it's, it says here, the fastest route is 2 hours and 14 minutes to get 77 kilometers. Like, so, I mean, that's, it's hard to really understand, but it's not that far. And Babaji, they didn't have vehicles. I don't know how he got there, but he only went there 6 or 7 times. And he sat in the back, and nobody knew he was. Nobody noticed him. And so he started intercommunion with Lalaji when Lalaji died. And Lalaji brought him through the spiritual yatra and did all the things that, all the experiences, and charged his points. And, Krishna and Swami Vivekananda were celebrating Lalaji's accomplishment with Babaji and all this stuff, right? And Babaji had a preceptor guy used to ride a tiger. He had like a tiger he would ride around or something like that. And this guy was, he'd knock monkeys off the wall with transmission. Like he was like kind of a rebel. And he was, used to eat Babaji's food to make sure he wasn't poisoned. And he struggled a little bit. Lalaji was intercommuning with them, and he, at first didn't, he was Babaji's preceptor, but didn't accept him as the successor. But eventually he got up at a group meditation and announced that Lalaji had a successor named Babaji. And Lalaji had made all these serious yogis, and they had yogic powers, and he would prescribe mantras, and it was not the same practice. And these guys turned on Babaji. A lot of them tried to kill him. Only 5 people stayed with him. And so, like, they tried to will him to death with their spiritual powers and steal his spiritual powers. And they all got punished, and it was a whole thing. And so this was documented in Babaji's diary and, some of these other places. And so there wasn't a smooth transition. Of course, Babaji, his kids didn't accept Charji, and there was a second, set of preceptors and gathering at Shah Jahanpur after Babaji died. And, 90%, as Kamala said, 90% of the Abhyasis that were Babaji people didn't accept Charji. Charji then had to impose discipline, and all the hippie boomer liberals were, in Europe and America rebelled against him. And so he faced a really tough transition. And so Kamlesh's transition has been the smoothest. But of course he sucks, right? And there's so much emphasis put on accepting Kamlesh because everyone knew how Charji was treated. And so nobody wanted to be that guy. The guy that I am, right? That no one wanted to be the guy that I am right now. Because, what happened to Charji? And I prayed that I'd be able to accept this guy. And I did ahead of time. Like, I knew who he was. Like, I had good experiences with Kamlesh. And it was easy for me to accept him as the master. And I saw him become the master. So that's why it was so hard for me, even with all that I saw, to, realize that he was he sucked, right? And Kamlesh has the, full endorsement of Charji in, the real world, and Babaji in the Whispers world, brighter world. And so there was no indication that this could ever happen. This system is supposed to go on for 10,000 years. And this clown has the endorsement of Charji and Babaji. So, and the Divine Hymnology and all the rest of them. And so it's a hard thing to navigate because he sucks so frickin' bad. And he's turned on his master, and the evidence of his falliness is overwhelming, which I've covered in all my videos. And yet all these people who are sheeple in their orientation to life, they're not truthers, they're not truth seekers. And many of them the majority of them come from the Indian culture. We don't challenge elders. You don't speak up. You don't be a whistleblower. You don't do these things. You just be a cog in the wheel, and you subservient and whatever it is, right, to these people, the gurus, and And so it's a thing that's nobody's prepared for. The organization is floundering, and it can't, exist. And as good as I am at what I do and exposing these things, and my regular videos, I don't have any solution to this thing. I'm not a person that could bring people together. I'm the worst at networking of probably anybody I know. I'm introverted. I don't really like people. I'm kind of, I don't want to say hostile, but I'm just not into it. And so, I don't have a solution to it, and I don't see a solution, and I'm good at figuring out solutions because you have to make a master. A master has to be made, and there's a precedent in the system where a master could be made without there's a gap in time with between Babaji and Lalaji. There's 13 years where there's no master, and Babaji came out, and Lalaji instructed him to create what is now called the Sri Ramchandra mission after Lalaji, and Saj Marg, and the emblem and the things that they're there, and an organization. And then Charji came along, who was a businessman, and had all the skills necessary to manage the mission. He became secretary of the mission. He was responsible for the financials and the travel, and he took care of Babaji and things. And Babaji was, not capable of most of these things, right? And so he needed people to help him, because he was just a, spiritual giant, but he was, not really. He might have been dyslexic himself, and there's evidence of that or something. Just an alternative. He just wasn't a businessman and these other things, but he had, he said Charji is a very competent, capable person, right? So that was high praise, because how many people can you say that about on all levels, spiritual, material. And then Charji was this amazing person that could do all these things, and he just carried the mission for the next, whatever it is, 30 years, from 1983 to 2014, 31 years, and then there was nobody that could fill his shoes. And they got somebody who's the worst, and a bunch of Abhyasis who are weak and pathetic and just, leeching off the system, but really didn't have the, that could be kind of harsh here, but, that's reality. People who didn't deserve what they were getting and weren't prepared for what happened, and now don't know what to do, and there's no clear path forward. That's the Saj Marg system now. There's no, for all of us, really we just, we're going to limp along until some big shit starts happening, whether it be the collapse of the system, the material system, and maybe people will become like just more spiritual. Like there'll be a reduction in the population of lots of negative people and lower developed people who don't have the capacity for this kind of and they'll just be left with higher developed souls. I mean, I can see that as the only path forward if you want to raise humanity up to a higher level. And there'll be just a spiritual consciousness we don't have now because the material distractions will be gone, and all the heavy vibrations and all the heavy stuff will be disappeared. I mean, that's and then there'll be a common knowledge that we effed up, that we screwed up, and that that we have to redeem ourselves, and there'll be a natural craving for this energy, and people will be able to connect directly. I mean, we're doing it now. There's some hope. I mean, gratefulness meditation is a good example. Like many of us are connecting directly, not because of Doooji, but despite him, right? He's an obstacle, and the organization is an obstacle. So we don't need the organization. We don't need him. It isn't as good as it was, but it's better in some ways. And we have to do more. And so that's the template for people in the future. And there's people doing it. There's people doing it who are just hearing about the Sajmark system through me. And maybe they tried heartfulness and it worked for a little bit until it just did. And then all of us, started doing the gratefulness meditation. It's like, maybe 100 people, I don't know. But that 100 people is a start, and it's, it's a template, so that's something. And so there is some success to build on. There is some, path towards a different type of organization in the future. And, we'll just see what happens. But I'm glad to report that the transmission is really flowing now, and the energy's still there, and I feel, very positive about it. I'm a little bit tired this morning, but, I'm feeling good about the, everything post the gathering. And so I just want to add all those things. It's a difficult situation because it was never like any hint of this being a possibility. In fact, everything that we had heard was the opposite. And so, the Doooji Debacle is, something for people to negotiate and navigate. And I think for the most part, people are failing. But, how could they succeed? Like, like what would make them be able to do it, right? To rise up to it. Because, it's something that, you have these fire drills when you're a kid, like at school. And they teach you what to do in case of a fire. And like you practice them, and it's good to do that. Like, I would talk about turning off the electricity. We used to do this and see what we would do without electricity as a family, and just preparing for things like that in the future, like things that we're not, like we just, what people freak out when the electricity goes out. And like we had an experience as a family where the electricity went out, and I did a video called we lost electricity, but we didn't lose power, because that's what they say, you lose power. Like we were empowered to be able to deal with that. And so there was, no reference point, and nobody had practiced a master fail like the Chargy to Doooji Debacle, the switch from a master who was micromanaging everything and carrying everybody, to a guy who was a scam artist and a dope and just a fool and, horrible. I mean, the worst words that you could use about a person. And he had neglected he was failing, right? He had failed master and all the clowns and cronies around him and taking it in the wrong direction. Like there's zero, this came as a total shock to everybody. Like nobody saw it coming. And even if they saw it coming, they weren't prepared to do anything about it, because there was no, there was nothing in the system, in the literature, and anywhere to say this is what you do when you deal with something like this, right? Like they don't know what to do. Like we're all just floundering. Like, so for me, and really what you had to do, where I've been successful personally, is that I've allowed the inner, master, the just being guided from within and using my heart to navigate it. And when the things unfolded, and I received a sitting without Doooji, which has happened now numerous times, where energy just started to come to me randomly. And I started to meditate, and it was, a great sitting. And I received that in Masad after Doooji canceled the Chargy of Babaji's birthday and that fake Worcester's message that turned out to be just a joke anyway. And so starting the gratefulness meditation is there are people who also were not feeling it. Like I just wasn't feeling this, the energy. And so that was that was an example of success, right? And other people can, figure out how to navigate that themselves. But, I don't know what they're doing or not. So like, I don't know what their success or failure is. I'm not in communication. I only talked to one person who was an older Abhyasis. And the rest of them are, just, they're floundering, right? They're trying to stick with Doooji, but they're putting their head in the sand, but some part of them knows, and, they're just floundering. But anyways, so, I can feel good about the gratefulness meditation now because of that, all of it, right? Because it's, it's at least it's preserving some of the system. Anyways, let me wrap this one up here. Only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.